Everybody seems to fall the wrong way. Oh, their hearts may break, and it's all fate. Everyone beneath the sun loves Broadway, Broadway. Nothing but a melting pot is Broadway. You're a star while you are hot on Broadway. But Main Street comes and goes, and the whole world knows the only street that can't be beat is old Broadway.
waiting for a little word of love from you. A tender little kiss or two. A happiness I never knew. Listen to my song and let my melody proclaim for me that you're the one that I adore. And if you answer no, then on my way I'll go to be forevermore a lonely
Thank you.